fascinating door, and you all know it because you see it on television all the time. So of course the problem you've got if you're a guide and you want to show the front of number 10 Downing Street is that you can't get in. You normally see this wonderful gateway manned by police. It is still a public right of way, but you know, trying to convince a policeman to let you take a group down there isn't easy. People have occasionally done it, but it's I think we have to make do with the virtual view, and a virtual view shows you number 10 Downing Street. We've got number 10 Downing Street on this side, you can see there, and then we've got number 11 where the Chancellor of the Exchequer theoretically lives, and then number 12. Now, number 10 and number 11 are both the original houses that were part of a development of 15 houses built on Crown land here. In fact, Christopher Wren is supposed to have done the design work for them. It has to be said, the Downing Street was essentially marshy, built on a branch of the Tyburn River, and it's an absolute, built with no foundations, as fairly typical of houses of the period. And it's extraordinary that these two houses have actually survived as long as they have done, not without a considerable work having to take place in the background to keep them in one place. Now I want to show you the square as it was originally developed. It's actually Downing Square rather than Downing Street. And to do that, I have to tab to my browser, and hopefully with my browser, I will be able to show you, hey, that's a picture, hopefully you can see it, of what was Downing Square. And you can see number 10, number 11 was on this side of the street. And although when the square was first built, it was differently numbered. In fact, the whole area has been numbered, renumbered 3 times. So going back to the presentation, and the square was developed by this chap, Sir George Downing, who is a fascinating character. Samuel Pepys worked for him early on in his working career, and he called him a perfidious rogue, which is a pretty good term, and I think really does account as a good summary for Sir George Downing. He was born in Wales. He attended Yale, would you believe? He became a preacher. From a preacher, he came to England, fought for the Commonwealth, and then he became a turncoat and actually worked for Charles II. And he was a bit of a spy master, and he went out and tried to assassinate many of the people the regicides that had been involved in the killing of Charles I. Fascinating character. An interesting aspect to him is, if you think about New York, why is New York called New York? It used to be New Amsterdam. It was this chap who actually started the process of conquering the Dutch colonies and changing New Amsterdam to New York. But anyway, towards the end of his life, in 1682, he, at least for 50 years, a set of crown land from the King, Charles II, and started to build the houses that we saw in the previous picture. Now, let's get to the door, because the door is the famous thing that we all remember. And it's a gorgeous door, I think. It's got lots and lots of features, including some wonderful ironwork. And the ironwork, the lantern up on top, the boot scrapers and the railings. This all dates from the period when Lord North was in the number 10, and Lord North's kind of right-hand man happened to be Beau Brummell's father. So he was probably in charge of actually, Billy Brummell, he was probably in charge of making this modification to the original house. We zoom in a little bit further. There are some interesting aspects about the door. Actually, there's quite a lot of interesting aspects about the door. The first thing, there is no keyhole. We say the Prime Minister gets the keys to number 10 Downing Street. Well, he doesn't, because number 10 Downing Street doesn't have any keys. And in fact, it's got a letterbox and a knocker and a bell, none of which work. And that's because the door is essentially continually watched by a policeman inside and is opened and closed by the policeman. Another thing that's interesting about it is if you look at the number 10 itself and look at the letters, the 0 in the 10, it's a very odd shape. And actually it's a naught, it's a capital O on its side, slightly slanted. This has now become a brand. And if you look at 10 Downing Street, whenever they put an announcement out, they try and repeat that 1 and the 0. But it actually only dates to the 1960s, and it was part of a major renovation that took place, which actually completely rebuilt number 12 and did a lot of rebuilding in number 10 and number 11 by a chap called Raymond Ereth, who was an architect at the time. And he really got annoyed because there was a lot of cost cutting that went on in the project. And the Ministry of Works was told to use a font that he designed for the doors, but instead they used a font they had called the Trajan font, which has the letters, but it doesn't actually have numbers. So they had to use the letter 0 for the naught. Raymond Ereth absolutely hated this. Every time he walked past the building, it made him really, really cross. And there are many other things he objected to in the restoration that took place. The other thing that's interesting is the letterbox. And if you zoom into the letterbox, you'll see that the wording on the letterbox is the First Lord of the Treasury. And it's important that because actually number 10 Downing Street is not a formal home of the Prime Minister, it's the formal home of the First Lord of the Treasury. Now, the First Lord of the Treasury is usually the Prime Minister, but doesn't have to be. At least 2 previous Prime Ministers have decided not to be First Lord of the Treasury. That's Chatham and Salisbury, both of whom had grander residences elsewhere, and so didn't need this residence and gave it to one of their colleagues. The concept of the First Lord of the Treasury is interesting. It comes from the Crown, who actually had a treasurer, and the Lord Treasurer. And when that post was abolished in the early 1700s, they basically created a commission which fulfilled the role that the Lord Treasurer had previously done, and that commission was the Lords of the Treasury. And the First Lord is typically the Prime Minister. The Second Lord is usually the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and he's the one that does all the work. And the third and subsequent Lords are the government whips, not, oddly enough, including the Chief Whip. The Chief Whip has a separate title. And we can look at the relationship between the First Lord of the Treasury and that door. It really goes back to this chap, Sir Robert Walpole, later became known as the Earl of Orford. He was actually made the First Lord of the Treasury 3 times. He was a fantastic parliamentarian, and he was a member of the cabinet that gave advice to the king, first of all George I, later on George II, and he really became preeminent in that cabinet to the point where people started calling him Prime Minister. And that Prime Minister title had actually been used before, but only occasionally, whereas everyone called Walpole Prime Minister, both the opposition and his supporters. And he was probably also as well as being the first real Prime Minister, he was probably the corruptest Prime Minister we've ever had. And this is in an age where corruption was taken for granted. But in his second term of office as First Lord of the Treasury, he managed to make £60,000 in the first 3 years of the office, which is pretty good going in the money of the day. Number 10 Downing Street was actually offered to Walpole as a personal gift by King George II. At the time, he thought it was politically inappropriate to accept it as a personal gift, so he said he suggested it would be the home and the office for future First Lords of the Treasury, and that's indeed what happened. And he employed the architect William Kent. And William Kent took the house on Downing Street, actually at the time it was number 5 Downing Street, and he connected it to a mansion that overlooks Horse Guard Parade. And when you look at the front of the house, that door looks as if the house is relatively small. In fact, number 10 Downing Street has over 100 rooms in it, most of which are actually the mansion block at the back, which is connected to the main house. We can see that if we look at the map of the area. If you see the map, here's Downing Street. It's blocked off at each end. And then we've got this massive building here, which is the number 10 Downing Street. And then a smaller, the number 11 Downing Street. And then next door, the home of the Chief Whip. It used to be the Chief Whip's office. It's now actually the press office. The Chief Whip lives over here nowadays as his office. Back to the door again. Another famous occupant, of course, is Larry, the chief mouser, the cat that's been there since 2011. It's said that occasional prime ministers hate the cat, but he's still surviving there. And he's got various colleagues as well. So there's Gladstone, the Treasury cat as well. His food is paid for by the civil service, but his vet bills have to be paid for by the staff at number 10. So a rather nice touch, I think, there. And then the door itself, well, the door is interesting. It's not one door, it's at least 5 doors. The door that was part of the 1960s refurbishment by Raymond Erith is now in the museum. It's actually the Churchill Museum, around the back in the Cabinet War Rooms. Still looked after by number 10. They do the polishing of the door, but it's no longer in use. The front door is actually, the one we've been seeing up to now, is actually a stainless steel door, very thick, put in the 1990s when they were worried about terrorism, and it weighs an absolute ton and is painted at the front. And if it has to be removed for any reason, you need 5 or 6 people to shift it because it really is very, very heavy. And there is a second door, and they'll switch one door for the other door if they need to do any maintenance on the first door. So there are 2 doors to number 10 Downing Street that are in regular use. And then there are 2 more doors, and the 2 more doors are artistic doors, and they were fixed to Downing Street for a week or so, and then they went off on their travels. This one with a profile of a cat, and there's another similar one with a bigger cat on it. And they tend to hang out in embassies around the world, and they also appear in various art galleries. So there are at least 5 doors in 10 Downing Street. There may be more, but 5 I know about. And then what happens if you want to take a photograph in front of 10 Downing Street? Well, the recommendation is, instead of using 10 Downing Street, take your guests along to 10 Adams Street. The door at 10 Adams Street is very similar to the door at 10 Downing Street. This is unless you're a film company. If you're a film company, you tend to use the doors at the RSA, because there's a door at the RSA, Royal Society of Arts, which looks very similar to 10 Downing Street. And of course, you can make all the fittings to that door if you pay the RSA enough money. So on the films and things, you'll find most of them are actually filmed in front of the RSA. I'll leave you with an older picture, one dating back to 1974, with a bobby on the front door. So any questions, I'd be happy to have a go at answering.